My name is Alara, and I'm 32 years old now. For most of my life, the world saw me as little more than a shadow, a whisper of a girl who preferred the scent of hay and horsehide to the heady perfume of a ballroom. It was a preference that earned me little more than scorn from my own family, but I never could have imagined that my greatest shame would become their only salvation, or that a wild, untamable stallion would be the key to unlocking a truth that would change everything. The day my brother was arrested, accused of a crime that could ruin our family name forever, was the day my quiet world was shattered. But it was also the day I began to find my voice, a voice that only one creature on earth truly understood. Before I dive into how a stolen horse and a single silver cufflink exposed a conspiracy that stunned the entire county, I want to thank you for being here. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, or if you've ever found solace in the company of animals, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. For all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe to join this wonderful community of people who understand that sometimes our greatest strengths are the ones others refuse to see. My story really begins not with a crime, but with a scent. 2 scents, to be precise. The first was the smell of the stables at dawn. It was a rich, earthy perfume of sweet hay, worn leather, and the warm, living musk of the horses themselves. To me, it was the smell of peace, of honesty, of a world where you were judged not by the elegance of your words or the grace of your curtsy, but by the steadiness of your hand and the calm in your heart. The second scent was my mother's lavender water. It was a sharp, aggressive floral that clung to the damask curtains and the polished mahogany of our home. It was the scent of expectation, of social obligation, and of constant, quiet disappointment. It was the scent of the life I was supposed to want, a life that felt as ill-fitting as the stiff silk gowns she insisted I wear. From as early as I could remember, I was a creature of the stables. While my brother Julian was being praised for his effortless charm and his skill with a fencing foil, I was memorizing the unique knickers and whinnies of our mares. He was the sun around which our family orbited, bright, warm, and universally admired. I was the moon, pale and often hidden, content to reflect a little of his light while finding my own purpose in the shadows. My father, Lord Alistair, was a man who measured success in titles and landholdings. He loved Julian with a proud, booming affection that was plain for all to see. His love for me was a quieter, more puzzled thing, like a man examining a strange bird that had somehow found its way into his aviary. He wasn't unkind, but he was distant, perpetually preoccupied with the grand machinery of our family's standing in the world. My mother, Lady Seraphina, was the architect of my misery. She saw my preference for the stables not as a harmless eccentricity, but as a personal affront, a deliberate act of social sabotage. "Ilara, for heaven's sake," she would say, her voice tight with exasperation as I came in from the yard. "You smell like a barn. How do you ever expect to attract a suitable husband when you carry the aroma of livestock with you? Look at your hands, calloused, your hair is a mess. We are hosting the Penworths for dinner, and you look like you've been wrestling a goat." Julian, to his credit, would sometimes try to intervene. "Mother, leave her be. She's happy." But his defense was always fleeting, a brief skirmish before he retreated back into the warmth of her approval. He didn't understand. He couldn't. For him, the world was a welcoming place. For me, it was a series of trials I was doomed to fail. A ballroom was my personal hell. The crush of bodies, the cacophony of meaningless chatter, the weight of 100 judging eyes, it all combined to make my throat close and my palms sweat. I would spend entire evenings plastered to a wall, a wilting flower in a hothouse, counting the seconds until I could escape back to the quiet solitude of the stables. It was there, in the gentle presence of the horses, that I could finally breathe. They didn't care about witty retorts or elegant dancing. They cared about presence. They sensed fear, they responded to calm, and they offered a simple, uncomplicated affection that I found nowhere else. My bond with them was the most real thing in my life. I could coax a nervous filly to take a sugar cube from my hand when even the most experienced grooms had failed. I could soothe a colt spooked by a thunderstorm with nothing more than a low hum and a steady hand on its neck. This was my language, the only one I spoke with any fluency, but in my family's world it was a useless dialect. The rivalry between my brother and Lord Harrington was the stuff of local legend. It was a fire fueled by pride and stoked by proximity. Harrington was a man who wore his ambition like a finely tailored coat. He was handsome in a severe sort of way, with a sharp jaw and eyes that always seemed to be calculating angles. He and Julian had been competitors since boyhood, in the classroom, on the hunting field, and now in the world of horse racing. Harrington had money, but our family had the older name, and until recently, the faster horses. The tipping point had come 2 months before the disaster. It was the day of the County Cup, the most prestigious race of the year. Julian was riding our prize stallion, Stardust, a magnificent creature with a heart for running. Harrington had spent a fortune on a thoroughbred from the continent, a beast of a horse named Goliath. The entire county had turned out to watch. The race was neck and neck, a brutal, thundering contest of will and endurance. In the final stretch, Julian, with a masterful piece of riding, urged Stardust ahead to win by less than a nose. I watched from near the stables, unable to bear the tension of the grandstand. The roar of the crowd told me the result. Later, I saw Harrington confront Julian near the winner's circle. His face was a mask of cold fury. "You got lucky, Julian," he'd snarled, his voice low and venomous. "Enjoy it. Every dog has its day." Julian, ever the graceful victor, had simply smiled and offered a handshake, which Harrington pointedly ignored. The public humiliation curdled Harrington's ambition into something much darker. From that day on, a palpable poison hung in the air whenever the two men were near each other. Harrington began to lose himself in bitterness, his conversation turning to veiled insults and sour insinuations about our family's finances and integrity. It was during this time that Tempest arrived in the county. He belonged to our neighbor, a wealthy but timid old gentleman named Mr. Gable. Tempest was a creature of pure, unadulterated wildness, a stallion as black as a starless night with a fire in his eyes that spoke of unbroken spirit. He was magnificent and terrifying. The story was that he'd been acquired from a remote western moor and had injured 3 stable hands since his arrival. No one could get near him. He was deemed untamable, a beautiful, dangerous mistake. I first saw him when I was riding along the border of our properties. He was in a high-fenced paddock, tearing at the turf, his muscles coiled like powerful springs. The grooms were outside the fence, watching him with a mixture of fear and awe. But I felt something else. I felt a pull, a strange kinship with this fierce, misunderstood creature. I saw not malice in his eyes, but a profound and desperate fear. He was trapped, surrounded by beings he didn't understand, and he was lashing out. I began to visit him. At first, I would just sit on the other side of the fence, speaking to him in a low, soothing tone for an hour at a time. I didn't try to approach. I just let him get used to my presence, my voice. Slowly, cautiously, he started to watch me. The wild, panicked rolling of his eyes ceased. He would stand at the far end of the paddock, head high, listening. After a week, he took a few tentative steps toward me. By the 3rd week, he would come to the fence and allow me, through the rails, to stroke his powerful neck. The grooms who worked for Mr. Gable were astonished. One of them, a kind old man named Silas, started letting me into the paddock. "He's different with you, miss," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Like you speak his language." Inside the enclosure, our bond deepened. I learned the specific pitch of his ears that meant he was anxious, the soft rumble in his chest that signified contentment. I discovered he had a sweet spot just behind his left ear that would make his lip tremble with pleasure. I never used force or a bit, only patience and understanding. I was the only person in the world who could ride him. The feeling of being on his back, of moving as one with such a powerful wild creature, was the closest I had ever come to true freedom. The night it all fell apart was the night of the annual midsummer ball, the pinnacle of the social season. My mother had commissioned a new gown for me, a confection of pale blue silk that felt like a cage. "This is an important night, Alara," she'd said, her fingers fussing with a stray curl at my temple. "Lord Harrington will be there. He's a bachelor of considerable means. A little charm would not go amiss." The suggestion was so absurd it was almost comical. The idea of charming the man who openly despised my brother was one thing. The idea of me charming anyone was another entirely. The ball was precisely as awful as I'd anticipated. I danced the obligatory first waltz with my father, stepping on his feet twice, and then retreated to the safety of a shadowy alcove behind a large potted fern. I watched Julian hold court, laughing and trading stories, a king in his element. I saw him exchange clipped, tense words with Harrington near the punch bowl. Harrington's smile was a predatory slash in his face. I could feel the animosity radiating from him even from across the room. Feeling suffocated, I slipped out onto a terrace, and then, following an instinct as old as my own heartbeat, made my way toward the stables of the estate hosting the ball. The familiar scent of hay and horses was a balm to my frayed nerves. I stayed there for perhaps half an hour, just breathing, my cheek pressed against the warm, velvety nose of a gentle mare. When I returned, Julian was gone. The host mentioned he'd left early, complaining of a headache. I knew it was a lie. He was escaping Harrington's toxic presence. I felt a pang of guilt, wishing I had been there for him, but the relief of my own escape was too potent. I found our carriage and went home, blissfully unaware that the gears of a terrible plot were already turning. The next morning, the world ended. I was woken not by the gentle light of dawn, but by the sound of my mother's frantic sobbing. I rushed downstairs to find chaos. 2 constables stood grim-faced in our foyer, and between them stood Magistrate Davies. He was a new arrival to our district, a man with a reputation for being whip-smart and immune to the pressures of local politics. He was younger than I expected, with serious, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that seemed almost alien amidst my family's hysteria. Lord Harrington was there too, standing near the doorway, the very picture of a wronged man. His prize stallion Tempest, for he had recently purchased the horse from a relieved Mr. Gable, had been stolen from his stables in the dead of night. And a witness, one of Harrington's grooms, had seen a man matching Julian's description leading the horse away down a moonlit path. Julian, still in his dressing gown, was pale with shock. "This is insane," he kept repeating. "I came straight home from the ball. I didn't go anywhere near Harrington's estate. Your groom saw him, Harrington." My father boomed, his face red with fury. A disgruntled employee looking for a payout, no doubt. Magistrate Davies held up a hand, and a surprising silence fell over the room. "Lord Alistair, your son will have every opportunity to present his side of the story. For now, based on the sworn testimony of a witness and the known animosity between the 2 parties, I have no choice but to take him in for questioning." My mother let out a wail. The constables stepped forward. Julian looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen in him before. And just like that, the golden son of our house, the future of our family, was led away like a common criminal. The lavender scent in the air suddenly smelled like funeral flowers. In the days that followed, our house became a fortress of despair. My father spent his time closeted with lawyers, his face growing grayer with each passing hour. The evidence was circumstantial, but damning. The groom's testimony was firm. Julian's alibi was weak. He'd come home alone and gone straight to bed. No one had seen him. My mother took to her bed, her grief theatrical and all-consuming, her primary concern being the catastrophic social fallout. "We're ruined," she would moan to anyone who would listen. "Our name will be dragged through the mud. No one will receive us. This is a nightmare." They were so consumed by the shame, the insult, the public relations disaster, that they seemed to forget the very real possibility that Julian could be imprisoned. Then, news came that Tempest had been found. A farmer had discovered him wandering in a remote valley miles away, his saddle askew, a nasty gash on his flank. He had been brought back not to Harrington's estate, but to the more secure municipal paddock near the magistrate's office. The relief was short-lived. The horse was wilder than ever, crazed with pain and fear. He was unapproachable, lashing out with his hooves and teeth at anyone who dared enter his enclosure. No veterinarian could get near him to treat his wound, and no constable could get close enough to examine the saddle or tack for any potential clues. He was a piece of evidence that could neither be examined nor ignored. Listening to my father and his lawyer discuss the situation, a thought, fragile and yet insistent, began to form in my mind. Tempest. The horse was the only other witness to what had happened that night. He couldn't speak, but animals told stories in their own way. They carried scents. They bore traces of their journey. They held fear in their bodies. I knew this. I knew him. I was perhaps the only person in the world who could get close to him. I found my father in his study, a half-empty decanter of brandy at his elbow. "Father," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "Tempest. I can calm him. Let me go to him. Perhaps I can find something, see something that others can't." He looked up at me, his eyes clouded with exhaustion and annoyance. "Alara, this is not the time for your stable fantasies. This is a serious legal matter. We have the best solicitor in the county. What on earth do you think you can do that he can't?" "I know the horse," I insisted, a strange boldness rising in me. "He trusts me." My mother, who had swept into the room, overheard. "Oh, for goodness sake, Alara, don't be ridiculous. she snapped, her voice frayed. Your brother's life is falling apart, and you want to go and play with a horse? This is a matter for men and the law, not for stable girls. Go to your room, you are useless in this. Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Useless. All my life, that was what they had seen when they looked at me. An awkward, useless girl who was more comfortable with beasts than with people. The hurt was so sharp, so familiar, it almost buckled my knees. But this time, something else mingled with the pain. Anger. A cold, hard knot of it in my stomach. Julian was in a cell because of a lie, and the one key that might unlock the truth was running wild in a paddock, and I was the only one who could turn it. My family's blindness was no longer just a source of personal pain. It was now a direct threat to my brother's freedom. I made a decision. It was a terrifying, defiant act, so contrary to my nature, that my heart hammered against my ribs. If my family would not help me, I would go around them. I would go directly to the one person who seemed to operate on logic rather than hysterics. Magistrate Davies. He was a man of the law, a man of evidence. I had no evidence, only an instinct, a connection that no one else could possibly understand, but it was all I had. I found Magistrate Davies at the municipal paddock the next afternoon. He was standing by the high wooden fence, his hat in his hands, observing Tempest with a look of intense concentration. The stallion was a whirlwind of black fury inside the enclosure, his coat matted with sweat and dirt, his eyes rolling white with terror. A few constables and a veterinarian stood at a safe distance, their expressions a mixture of frustration and fear. He didn't notice me at first, and I had to clear my throat twice before he turned. His gaze was sharp, analytical. He recognized me instantly. "Miss Alara," he said, his voice even. "My condolences for your family's difficult situation." My carefully rehearsed speech evaporated. All that came out was a raw, desperate plea. "Magistrate, you have to let me in there." I pointed a trembling finger toward the frantic horse. He raised an eyebrow. "Into the paddock? Miss, that is out of the question. The animal is highly dangerous. He has already injured one of my men who tried to feed him." "He's not dangerous," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "He's terrified. I know him. He knows me. I can calm him. I'm the only one who can." The words tumbled out of me now, a torrent of conviction. He was there that night. He's the only witness besides the thief. There might be something on him, on the saddle, a scent, a tear in the fabric, anything. But you'll never find it if you can't get near him. Please, I know I can do this. Davies studied my face, his expression unreadable. I could see the skepticism in his eyes, the logical mind weighing the absurd proposition of a shy young woman against the violent reality of the 1,000-pound animal before him. Lord Harrington, who had just arrived with a proprietary air to check on his property, let out a short, derisive laugh. "The stable girl thinks she's a horse whisperer," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Davies, surely you're not entertaining this nonsense. The girl is known for being eccentric." The magistrate's eyes flickered to Harrington, a flash of annoyance in their depths, and then back to me. He saw the way I flinched at Harrington's comment, but also the way my jaw tightened in resolve. He looked back at the horse, then at the helpless veterinarian, then back at my pleading face. I think in that moment he saw what my own family never had. Not a useless girl, but a tool that might just fit a very specific lock. He was a pragmatist, and every other method had failed. "Very well, Miss Alara," he said finally, his voice cutting through Harrington's smirk. The constables and the vet stared at him in disbelief. "I will allow it, but on my terms. My men will be on hand. At the first sign of genuine danger, they will intervene, and you will exit the paddock immediately. Do you understand?" I nodded, my heart soaring with a terrifying mixture of triumph and fear. "Yes, thank you," Harrington sputtered. "You can't be serious. If she gets herself killed, it will be on your head." Magistrate Davies turned to him, his voice suddenly as cold and hard as iron. "Lord Harrington, my head is my own concern. This is an official investigation. Your role here is that of a victim, not an advisor. Please allow me to conduct my business." Harrington fell silent, his face flushing a dull, angry red. The magistrate looked back at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something other than professional assessment in his eyes. It might have been curiosity, it might have been respect. Whatever it was more than I had ever received from anyone outside of my beloved stables. It was enough. The gate to the paddock creaked open. A hush fell over the small crowd that had gathered, a morbidly curious collection of constables, town officials, and onlookers drawn by the drama. Harrington stood with his arms crossed, a smug, expectant look on his face, clearly anticipating my failure. My own family was there too. My father had been summoned by a concerned constable, and he had brought my mother. They stood near the back, my mother hiding her face behind a handkerchief, no doubt mortified by the public spectacle, my father looking pale and grim. I could feel the weight of their shame, a familiar, heavy cloak on my shoulders. But as I took my first step onto the churned-up earth of the enclosure, I let it fall away. They didn't matter right now. All that mattered was the terrified creature on the other side of the paddock. Tempest saw me, and his frantic pacing stopped. He threw his head up, nostrils flaring, a warning snort exploding from his lungs. He was a terrifying sight, a coiled spring of panic and power. The crowd gasped. One of the constables took a half-step forward, his hand on the truncheon at his belt. Magistrate Davies held up a single, silencing finger without taking his eyes off me. I ignored them all. I kept my body relaxed, my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't look him directly in the eye, which he would see as a challenge. Instead, I focused on a point just past his shoulder and began to speak, my voice low and soft. The same tone I had used 100 times before by the fence at Mr. Gable's farm. "Easy now, beautiful boy," I murmured. "It's just me. It's Alara. I know you're scared. I know you're hurt. But you're safe now. I'm here." I took another slow step, and then another. Tempest watched me, his ears twitching, processing the familiar sound of my voice. The wild, frantic energy coming off him began to subside, replaced by a tense, wary stillness. He was listening. He remembered me. I kept talking, a meaningless, soothing stream of words about the sweetness of oats and the warmth of the sun, about how strong and magnificent he was. It wasn't what I said, but how I said it. It was the language of calm, the oldest language in the world. I was 10 feet away now. I could see the shallow, ragged gash on his flank, dark with dried blood. I could see the trembling in his powerful legs. He let out a low, guttural whinny, a sound of profound distress. "I know," I whispered. "I know it hurts. Let me help you. Just let me get a little closer." I extended my hand, palm up, a gesture of peace. He took a hesitant step toward me, then another. His nose twitched, sampling my scent. The crowd was utterly silent, captivated. I could feel Davies's intense gaze on me, feel Harrington's disbelief boring into my back. I reached out and gently, so gently, let my fingertips brush against his muzzle. He flinched but didn't pull away. A collective sigh went through the onlookers. He was letting me touch him. My hand moved slowly up his face, stroking the soft space between his eyes, and then moved to the spot just behind his left ear. I scratched it softly. His eye began to droop, and his lip quivered, a familiar sign of his pleasure. The great terrifying stallion leaned his massive head into my touch, a deep rumble of contentment vibrating through his chest and up my arm. With the horse now calm, docile under my touch, I turned my attention to the task at hand. The saddle was twisted badly to one side, evidence of a struggle or a fall. As I ran my hand along his back to assess the damage, I noticed the saddle blanket beneath it was also askew, bunched up near his withers. Something was wrong. It was a fine woolen blanket, and as I smoothed it down, my fingers brushed against two things that didn't belong. The first was a scent. It was faint, nearly overwhelmed by the horse's own musky smell and the stench of his fierce sweat, but it was there, a sharp, spicy cologne. It was distinctive and expensive, a scent I recognized from the ball and countless other formal occasions. My mind catalogued it, but before I could place it, my fingers found the second thing. Snagged deep in the thick weave of the blanket was a small, metallic object. My heart began to pound. With painstaking care, I worked it free. It lay in my palm, glinting in the afternoon sun. It was a cufflink, a heavy silver cufflink, intricately engraved with a snarling boar's head, the crest of a well-known family. My breath hitched. I knew that crest. I held it up. The silver flashed, a tiny beacon in the dusty paddock. "Magistrate," I said, my voice clear and steady, louder than I had ever intentionally spoken in a public space. "I've found something." Magistrate Davies moved to the fence, his eyes sharp and focused on my hand. "What is it, Miss Alara?" "It's a cufflink," I said, turning to face the crowd, to face my family, to face a suddenly very still Lord Harrington. The crest is a boar's head. A wave of murmurs rippled through the onlookers. The Harrington family crest was a snarling boar's head. Every eye in the place swiveled from the cufflink in my hand to Lord Harrington. He was wearing a fine linen shirt, and I could see, even from a distance, that his right cuff was fastened with a plain button, not a matching piece of silver. He looked down at his own wrist as if just noticing, his face draining of all color. At the same moment, the scent I had detected on Tempest's mane finally clicked into place. It was Harrington's signature cologne, the one he wore in suffocating abundance. And the scent, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound certainty. The horse, he smells of your cologne, Lord Harrington. Harrington found his voice, a blustering, panicked sound. This is absurd. A trick. She planted it there. My cufflink went missing at the ball. Anyone could have picked it up. But his denial was drowned out by what happened next. As Harrington's angry, booming voice carried across the paddock, Tempest, who had been standing peacefully beside me, reacted instantly. His head shot up, his ears flattened against his skull, and a look of pure terror returned to his eyes. He recognized that voice. He let out a piercing, frightened squeal and reared up, his front hooves slashing at the air in Harrington's direction. He wasn't attacking. He was reacting in mortal fear. He stumbled back, putting my body between himself and the man at the fence. The message was unmistakable, a piece of testimony more powerful than any sworn oath. The horse was terrified of Lord Harrington. The crowd gasped. My mother stifled a scream. The visual evidence was undeniable, visceral, and absolute. This was not a horse who had been gently led away by my brother. This was a horse who had been brutalized by the man shouting at the fence. Magistrate Davies's face was like granite. He turned to one of the constables. Constable Jones, take a look at Lord Harrington's knuckles. Before the constable could move, a young man in the crowd, one of Harrington's own grooms, let out a choked sob. All eyes turned to him. He was barely a man, pale and shaking. He made me do it, the boy cried, tears streaming down his face. His lordship. He made me lie. He said he'd ruin my family if I didn't. He was the one who took the horse. He tried to ride him away, but the stallion fought him, threw him. That's how he got hurt. He said it was the perfect way to ruin the family for good. The confession hung in the stunned silence. Lord Harrington stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, trapped by a silver cufflink, a lingering scent, a boy's conscience, and the undeniable terror of a horse. Magistrate Davies nodded slowly, a grim satisfaction on his face. Lord Harrington, he said, his voice ringing with the finality of a closing cell door. You are under arrest for horse theft, perjury, and threatening a witness. The constables moved in, and the smug, arrogant lord who had orchestrated my family's ruin simply crumpled, all the fight gone out of him. I stood there in the middle of the paddock, my hand resting on the warm, trembling neck of the magnificent animal who had saved us, and for the first time in my life, I felt the ground firm and solid beneath my feet. The moments that followed were a blur of noise and motion. The constables led a defeated Harrington away. The crowd erupted into a chaotic buzz of shock and gossip. But all I could focus on was the sudden, overwhelming feeling of Julian's arms wrapping around me. He had been released from the holding cell the moment the groom confessed, and he ran straight to the paddock. He held me so tightly I could barely breathe, and I could feel his body shaking with relief. "Alara," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. I don't know what to say. You were amazing." Coming from him, the brother I had always idolized from afar, the words were like a balm on a lifetime of quiet hurts. My parents approached us, their faces a complex mixture of relief, astonishment, and deep, unsettling shame. My mother reached out as if to touch my arm, then hesitated, her hand hovering in the air between us. "Alara," she said, her voice uncharacteristically small, we are so grateful." It was a clumsy offering, a pale imitation of the apology I deserved, but it was a start. My father simply looked at me, his eyes filled with a dawning respect I had never seen there before. "I am so sorry, daughter," he said, the words gruff but sincere. "I was wrong. I underestimated you." And in that moment, I realized something profound. I had spent my entire life craving their approval, and now that I had it, it felt strangely hollow. The validation I had truly needed, I had just given to myself. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows from the hay bales, Magistrate Davies found me where I was most comfortable, in the stables. Tempest had been moved to our family's property for care, and I was tending to the gash on his flank, murmuring to him as I applied a soothing salve. He stood as still as a statue for me. Davies didn't enter the stall but leaned against the doorframe, watching us for a moment in comfortable silence. "The veterinarian said he's never seen a wound that clean on a horse this spirited," he finally said. "He gives you all the credit." "He's a good patient when he trusts you," I replied, not looking up from my work. "You were very brave today, Miss Alara," he continued, his voice softer now, stripped of its official tone. "You faced down a dangerous animal and a crowd of skeptics, including myself. You possess a remarkable gift." I finally looked at him. His praise felt different from my family's. It was not born of relief or guilt. It was a simple, objective statement of fact. He saw my skill not as a strange eccentricity, but as a genuine talent. "It isn't a gift," I said quietly. "It's just listening." "Then you are a better listener than most," he said with a small smile. "I came to ask if you would be willing to provide a formal, detailed statement tomorrow morning. But I confess, I also came to satisfy my own curiosity. I've never seen anything like what you did today." We talked for over an hour, leaning against the warm wood of the stable. He asked me about horses, about how I learned their language, and he listened, truly listened to my answers. I found myself speaking to him with an ease that was entirely foreign to me. He was not judging me or trying to fit me into a predetermined box. He was simply interested. In turn, he told me a little about himself, about growing up in the city, and his desire for a justice that was blind to wealth and status. I saw in him a mind that was sharp and fair, and a spirit that was unexpectedly gentle. When he finally left, he paused at the stable door. "For what it's worth," he said, "your family is very lucky to have you." The words settled in my heart, not with the triumphant fire of vindication, but with the quiet, steady warmth of simple recognition. Life at home changed irrevocably. The atmosphere of ridicule that had suffocated me for so long had evaporated. It was replaced by a strange, awkward deference. My mother stopped making comments about my hair or the scent of hay that clung to my clothes. Instead, she would ask my opinion on the household accounts or the dinner menu, as if my sudden competence in one area must surely extend to all others. It was a clumsy, misguided attempt to connect, and it only highlighted how little she had ever known me. Julian became my staunchest ally. He started spending more time in the stables, not just riding, but watching me, asking for my advice on a lame hunter or a nervous mare. The hero worship I once held for him transformed into a genuine, respectful friendship between equals. He saw me now, truly saw me, and for that I was grateful. But the dynamic had shifted in a way I hadn't expected. I no longer needed them to see me. I was beginning to see myself. A year can change a person in ways they never thought possible. The shy, awkward girl who once hid behind ferns at balls was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her own worth, a worth that had nothing to do with social graces or a wealthy marriage. I took the small inheritance left to me by my grandmother, the only relative who had ever truly cherished my love for animals, and I started my own business. I didn't want to breed racehorses like my father. I wanted to heal broken ones. I became a specialist in rehabilitating difficult, traumatized horses, the ones that others had given up on. My reputation, built on the legendary story of Tempest, grew quickly. People from all over the county and then from neighboring counties began to bring me their hopeless cases, and I, using nothing more than patience and the quiet language of calm, helped them. My relationship with Thomas Magistrate Davis blossomed alongside my business. He courted me not with flowery poems or extravagant gifts, but with his presence. He would visit me at my modest but thriving stable yard, rolling up his sleeves to help me mend a fence or brush down a horse after a training session. He loved to watch me work, fascinated by the silent communication that passed between me and the animals. He valued my mind, my strength, my quiet competence. With him, I never felt awkward or out of place. I just felt like myself. He was the safe harbor I had never known I was searching for. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after Julian's arrest, my parents came to visit me at my stables. It was still a slightly stilted affair, but the effort was there. They brought a gift. I expected a bolt of silk or perhaps some jewelry, another attempt to mold me into the daughter they always wanted. But instead, my father held out a magnificent, custom-made leather saddle, the finest I had ever seen. "For your work," he said, his voice thick. "We are so very proud of you, Ilara." My mother stood beside him, nodding, her eyes shining with unshed tears. It was more than a gift, it was a surrender. It was their acknowledgement that my world, the world of the stables, was just as valid and important as theirs. I accepted it with a quiet grace, the old wounds finally beginning to scar over, no longer aching with the need for their approval. Just then, Thomas arrived, his familiar, steady presence a welcome sight. He greeted my parents warmly before turning to me, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a smile that was just for me. As my parents left, he took my hand and we walked through the fields, watching my horses graze peacefully in the golden light. "Are you happy, Ilara?" he asked, his voice soft. I looked at the life I had built, the thriving business, the animals I had saved, the love of a good man who saw and cherished me for exactly who I was. I thought of the girl who used to hide in the shadows, who believed her only value lay in the approval of others. She seemed like a stranger to me now. "Yes, Thomas," I said, my voice full and clear. "I am." It was the truest thing I had ever said. The world had tried to tell me I was speaking a useless language, but it turned out to be the only one capable of revealing the truth, of healing my family, and finally of setting me free. My journey taught me a lesson that I carry with me every single day. Your worth is not a reflection in someone else's eyes. It is a fire you build within yourself. For years, I allowed others to define me by my perceived weaknesses, by the ways I failed to meet their expectations. But it was in embracing what made me different that I found my true strength. Sometimes, the very thing the world dismisses in you is the most powerful gift you have. It might not be calming a wild horse, but we all have that unique skill, that quiet passion that makes us who we are. Don't ever let anyone make you feel ashamed of it. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong in a spectacular way? Share your story in the comments below. This is a safe space to celebrate those victories, big or small. Your experiences give strength to so many others in this community. And please don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more stories of vindication and self-discovery. Thank you so much for joining me today, and for listening with such open hearts. Remember that family is not just about the blood you share, but about the respect and support you give. I wish you all the strength to find and nurture your own.